Little bit of controversy to deal with before we start this review, and that's the fact that this car is officially called the Smart #1. That's what Smart insists we call it, so that's what we're going to do. Also, we're about to have a Smart hashtag drive of it here in Portugal, which has nothing to do with the car other than it's hot and pretty. Now, I am very much looking forward to this because I was really impressed with this car when I had a passenger ride in it earlier in the year, and now I'm actually going to get to drive it. So first of all, let us know what you think in the comments, and no more arguing about the name. So let's start with the basics. Now, Smart is now a co-production between Mercedes Benz and Chinese überMegaCorp Geely, and the Smart #1 is based on a small chassis from Geely called the SEA platform. It's the same set of bones that's going to form the basics of cars that are coming from companies like Volvo, so it should be a good little basic skeleton. And the basic car comes with rear-wheel drive, 271 brake horsepower, and a decent 0 to 62 time of about 6.9 seconds, which all sounds perfectly sensible. Now, the #1 is obviously another kind of jacked up hatchback, small SUV type thing. But the reason for that is because batteries are quite tall and they live underneath the car. So it's easier for a manufacturer to just raise the car up a little bit rather than engineer around it. So that's what we're going to have to get used to. So what we get is a car that's got quite a raised up stance for a 5-seat hatchback, but it's a little bit deceiving because this car is actually shorter than something like a Nissan Leaf, but wider and taller, so it's a bit more square. It's also much more rounded. It's not very aggressive. So if you look at the way this car is set up, it's got this full width light bar at the front that's mirrored by a very similar shape at the back. So it's got a kind of push me, pull you vibe. It looks very similar. They're definitely related. And there's no harsh surfacing. This is not an aggressive car. Also, when you walk around it, you notice that all the models get 19-inch wheels, so they all look decently proportioned in terms of the shapes when you're following it around. Then if you come around here, you just notice that everything has these rounded forms. This isn't a car that is angry. It's a bit more subtle than that. And then you get to one of the most striking points about the car, which is the roof. Now, it's got a black pillar here, which makes it look like this roof is floating. And then it's got this big blocky bit at the back, which I happen to think makes it look like the Smart is wearing someone else's hat, or that the roof went a bit droopy in the sunshine. That makes it sound like I don't like it, but I actually do. I think the Smart looks like a proper piece of product design. It might be a bit conservative now, but I also think that it won't date badly, and that's a good thing. Now, some of you may have noticed that this car is a little bit different. It's got these little badges scattered around it that say Brabus. Now, we arrived on the launch not expecting this car, but this is a very special version, where the standard Smart #1 has rear-wheel drive and 271 brake horsepower. This Brabus version has 4-wheel drive, 2 motors, and 420 brake horsepower. It gets from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 3.9 seconds. And the only way you can tell it's a Brabus is the fact that it's got those badges, it's got slightly different wheels, albeit the same size at 19 inches, and a very subtle body kit with this kind of red line that goes all around the bottom of the car. It is quite fast. #crikey. It's also got some vents in the bonnet, which are fake. As for the inside, the same sort of curvy, rounded theme continues. So you've got this big sort of T-shaped centre console that flares into this big oblong. Looks quite swoopy and nice. It's actually quite high compared to some of the electric cars that I've been driving, but manages to feel cosy rather than cramped. And there is absolutely tons of storage. So you've got this big shape down here, which is good for bigger objects, which is handy. And then under here, you've got a wireless charging tray, which is always useful. It's standard on most of the versions. A couple of USB-Cs and a 12-volt charger. There's a little glove box, which is good for hiding things away. And then here we have a little slot for your mobile phone, always handy. Couple of cup holders, and then here in this bin is actually a cooled space, so you can keep your chocolate unmelted. There's also some nice little details, like the mood lighting. You can have one of 64 colours, which actually means you can match it to your mood. I'm in a very red frame of mind. I have to say though, this does feel more upscale than some of the cars that I've been driving lately. Now, some of that is subjective, but when I really touch and feel the car, the quality is really good and the attention to detail is on point. It makes it feel like a premium product. Unsurprisingly, there's a decent chunk of kit, especially on the more expensive versions, including all the greatest hits you might expect, from advanced driver assistance systems to aircon, pseudo leather and heated bits and bobs. There's an optional Beats stereo, which is standard on this one, a glass roof and the ability to generate a digital key from your smartphone so that you can give the key to other people. It's packed with some nice features. The range runs from Pro Plus through Premium and Launch Edition, which all have the same battery and rear-wheel drive with 271 brake horsepower. All get 19-inch wheels and things like heat pumps, apart from the base Pro Plus. The Brabus on the top end gets the same battery, but another motor up front to give all-wheel drive and 420 brake horsepower, but more on that one in a bit. But the things I've been really playing with are the screens. Now you get this usual 10-inch info display in front of the driver, but this 12.8-inch touchscreen in the middle of the car. Now this is interesting because it's a completely new way of dealing with all the functions of this vehicle. Now Smart says that it's come up with a completely new way of doing things and it's more like a tablet computer than a touchscreen on a car. It immediately looks quite confusing. But the graphics are crisp, everything sort of touches really quickly, everything moves really nicely. It is a bit confusing at first. There's a lot of widgets, there's a lot of menus, there's a lot of things to touch and play with, and some of it does seem to be a little bit laggy, especially in these early cars. But it's got this little fox avatar here, which is supposed to help you do things. So if I say, "Hello Smart,"
what would you like to do next?
The fox answers me, "Could you open the driver's window, please?" Now, sometimes it understands you perfectly. To be honest, opening the window wasn't something I ever struggled with, but other times it struggles a little bit finding out what you want. This whole thing, by the way, is over-the-air updatable, and so it should remain fresh over the course of the Smart's life. It is not, at the moment, perfect. It doesn't support Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and because it's a little bit complicated, you have to sit with it for quite a long time to figure out where things are. One of the interesting things is that Smart's actually used a lot of inspiration and the chipsets from gaming computers to make this thing look slick, and actually I think it's really worked. It's fast and got loads of detail in the screen. The trouble with that is I think they've also put in all of the detail that they could. Some of the more often used functions I could do with being just more obvious. And I think having all of this stuff, this globe with all these different things on, it looks really busy, especially when you're driving down the road. You want it clearer and you want it more precise. I'm sure 14-year-olds will get this instantly, but me being old and a bit daft, I've struggled with it, if I'm honest. On a more practical note, space is good, but you're not going to be setting any records. There's really very decent legroom for the front seats and it's very agreeable in the back with these sliding seats. It's more like a big saloon car than a relatively small hatchback. The boot, though, is definitely nothing to write home about. At 273 litres, it's a bit down on a regular hatchback, but if you fold or slide the seats, it's better, and there's a false floor for things like cables, but it's not one big volume. Suffice to say, the Smart isn't winning any kind of van race. Got little kids? A decent pram would fill this, and the frunk is only 15 litres, so only useful for storing really small things, like chihuahuas you don't like. The good news is that the Smart #1 is actually very nice to drive. Now this isn't the kind of out-of-the-box wild thinking that made Smart what it was back in the day, but as a tidy, nice handling little electric car, it's got loads of appeal. The less powerful version at the moment has 271 brake horsepower, which is plenty for a car of this size, and it makes it quick, if not outright fast, so it gets from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 6.7 seconds, so that's plenty to be getting on with. It's probably the most kind of conservative of the bunch at the moment, but there are more modest versions that will arrive later. To be honest, I'm not sure you need even all of that 271 brake horsepower, and it's rear-wheel drive, so it does feel naturally quite sporty. I am happy though, because in this car, all of the little things seem to have been taken into account. The steering is nicely weighted and super accurate, and though the damping feels actually quite soft, it's got really good body control through corners, and even though it leans ever such a little bit, it kind of tells you what the car's doing. So it feels quite natural, and it also rides a lot better than I thought it would. When I first had a passenger ride in this car, I thought it would be quite hard, and actually it's not. It's still firm enough to get you around a roundabout, but it's not crashy or strange. There is brake regeneration as well, but unfortunately you can only access it through the screen, and it's only got 2 settings. And if you put it on maximum, it's kind of okay. It's not particularly strong, so I don't feel like this is a particularly aggressive one-pedal car. It's enough to work for you though, so that's all fine. The one thing I have been thinking though, on all of the versions of this Smart #1 that I've driven so far, they do still feel quite heavy. Now 271 brake horsepower is quite a lot in a car of this size, but it still weighs 1800 kilos. So you notice that again when you're braking, when you're accelerating and when you're going around a corner. I'm not saying this is bad, but you are always a little bit aware that it's quite porky. You also get drive modes, so you access those through this button just under the touchscreen, and you get Eco, Sport and Normal, as with most of the cars, and they just change things like the steering weight and the aggression of the throttle pedal. The rear-wheel drive car feels quite well balanced. It even sometimes feels like it wants to kick the rear end out, which is quite good fun. It's got a good turning circle, and everything about it's really pleasant. It's kind of like there's a lot of know-how in this car that's been applied, and it feels pretty good. The biggest compliment I can give it is that this immediately feels like a really well-engineered piece of kit. There's no massive dynamic holes to poke at, so I think this is a really good job. Great work, smart people. And yes, I pronounced that with a capital S. There is one thing though. This car that I'm driving is the Brabus version. Now that gives you the same motor as the 270 horsepower car in the back, but also an extra motor in the front, giving you all-wheel drive and 420 brake horsepower. What it also gives you is an extra mode in the driving modes that just says Brabus. I've just engaged it. Whatever will we do? Okay. So the car raises up like a speedboat, the nose points towards the sky, and it starts to make a noise like it's got an engine. It's really loud as well. Now this car gets from 0 to 62 miles an hour in under 4 seconds, 3.9. Now that is fast in anyone's book. And actually, it's really easy. I know that a lot of electric cars are fast, but as soon as you just stop it, and if you're at the traffic lights, all you have to do is this. The weird thing is the Brabus still feels quite heavy, so even though it's really quick and quite controlled, it does lean over. Now, some people would think that would be a really bad thing, but given the performance and given the weight, actually it's quite good. It gives you a sense of what the tyres are doing and how much grip you've got. It feels like a sports car, albeit a really big fat electric one. The Brabus is really quite a funny car. I think it's quite pointless, but whoever's made this has got a proper sense of humour. Even the noise is completely silly. It's really loud. It's actually not that pleasant, but it adds something to the experience. It makes you go, okay, it's a Brabus. The Brabus will show a sports car the way home, at least away from the lights. I know that's a petty trick, but it's one that I haven't got bored of yet. However, I will say that the premium spec rear-wheel drive is probably the most sensible choice. But back to more general smart news. So there are more versions of the one coming, but at the start all versions get a 66 kWh battery. The Pro Plus has a slightly different and less efficient motor, so that gets 260 miles of range on the WLTP cycle, but still has 271 brake horsepower. The Premium and Launch editions get a little more at 273 miles of range but the same power, and the Brabus has lots more power but only 248 miles of possible range. All get the same charging ability. So apart from the Pro Plus, which gets 7.3 kW AC, we're talking 22 kW ability for AC charging, so you'll be able to make the most of any AC charging post you happen to come across. And it's 150 kW DC charging as standard across the range, which is at the upper end of what you might expect from a car of this type. That means you'll only be spending half an hour for a 10 to 80% charge on a big public rapid charger. On a more common 50 kW charger, you're looking at just over an hour, and about 10.5 hours on a home wall box.
That'll be enough for most and means that longer journeys shouldn't be too much hassle. Decent range and fast charging means less time spent doing the boring bit. The Brabus gets the same charging hardware but a little less range like we mentioned, but you do get a lot more power to play with. Incidentally, I did wonder why the charge flap had to be here rather than back up under the badge, which would be cooler. Well, it turns out that bending the thick high voltage cables up into this position wasn't possible, so the flap stayed lower. Geek points for that knowledge.
I have to say that on first impressions, I'm really quite taken with the Smart #1, which despite what everybody says, I still just want to call the Smart 1. I think it looks interesting without being weird for the sake of it. And I think it's got some really outstanding tech features, although these pre-production versions do need a little bit of work. But better than that, I think it rides and handles and goes really well. Prices for the UK haven't been released as yet, so my best guess is going to appear at the bottom of the screen now. So no, not exactly cheap, but I do happen to think it's actually quite good value for money given the equipment you get. This feels like a brand that's really hit the ground running. Yes, there are some bugs to work out, but this is a really good start for Smart. It turns out that Smart isn't what it used to be, but in this case, revolution really is better than evolution. So Tilo, just for the avoidance of doubt, I wanted to check exactly what is this car called?
Smart #1.
So it is the #1.
Right.
Okay, that's perfect. That's all I really wanted to know.